I walked outside and found a family of strangers setting up folding chairs on my driveway like it was a damn picnic area. One of their kids pointed at my kitchen window and asked if the bathroom shack was public. And that's the exact moment I realized someone had turned my private road into a tourist entrance. It's wild how fast something you've lived with your whole life can suddenly feel like it's slipping through your fingers. That road they were sitting on? I grew up riding my bike down it barefoot most of the time, chasing dragonflies through the dust. It's not even a real road, just a long gravel drive, winding through the pines from the main road down to our house and out toward the lake. It splits off to nowhere unless you know the land. Folks around here always assumed it was private, which it was. Still is. My dad built it himself when I was 6. He poured every paycheck into this place after leaving the military, said he wanted to give our family something no one could ever take away. He was a quiet guy, always fixing things, always listening more than he spoke. I remember standing beside him while he laid down the stones by hand, explaining how the water would wash the dirt but not the bedrock, and that's how you build things that last. He called it his back porch to the world. I didn't get it then, but I do now. The road starts at the edge of the county-maintained pavement, goes through our southern tree line, curves past the creek, and ends right at the lakeshore. Our house sits halfway down, kind of nestled into the hill where you can't see it from the entrance unless you know where to look. The lake? Locals call it Devil's Elbow. It's not famous or anything, but it's peaceful, shallow near the edge, good for swimming, and it used to be a quiet spot. Families fished there, kids skipped rocks, teenagers snuck out there to make out. You know, normal stuff. Thing is, our land is the only land that touches both the county road and the lake itself. Everyone else who owns property nearby has access from the other side, through the old logging trail, which washes out every time it rains more than half a day. So over the years, neighbors started asking my dad, real polite, if they could come through. He was the kind of guy who'd never say no, so long as you asked nicely and didn't make a mess. That was the unspoken rule. You treat the land with respect, you can use the road. You treat it like a public dump, you're gone. When I inherited the property after Dad passed, I didn't really change much. Just updated the mailbox and added a gate at the entrance. Not one of those fancy coated things, just a basic metal swing gate with a chain. Honestly, I kept it unlocked most of the time. Old habit. Besides, folks knew better than to come barreling through. This wasn't their land. It was mine. And yeah, I know how that sounds, but this place meant something to me. It wasn't just a house or a patch of dirt. My kids learned to ride their bikes on that gravel. My wife and I had our first argument and our first big reconciliation sitting on the old wooden dock my dad built. Every inch of this property, from the creek that floods just enough in spring to the squirrel-ravaged birdhouses we keep pretending we'll fix, it's ours. So when I started getting letters from the HOA last fall, I thought it was a mistake. We're technically outside the HOA boundary, always have been. That was the whole point. Dad refused to sell even an inch of the land to developers when they were putting up that planned community 10 years back. They wanted a boat launch, a road, maybe even a little boardwalk setup. He told them no, flat out. I remember he laughed after they left, poured himself a glass of bourbon, and said, "If they ever want this dirt, they'll have to come dig it from my grave." Well, he's in that grave now, right under the oak tree at the top of the hill, just where he asked. And guess what? They've come digging. The new HOA president, I didn't even know her name back then, started by mailing me a courtesy notice about the road. Something about exploring opportunities for improved public access to shared natural resources. Read like a fundraiser letter, real neighborly. I ignored it, wasn't addressed properly anyway. Just property owner, parcel 7B. Not even my name. The second letter came certified, and that one got my attention. It said they were submitting a proposal to the county to classify my road as a public right-of-way, citing historic community use and public benefit. Said I had 30 days to respond or the petition would move forward without opposition. I remember standing in the kitchen with that letter in my hand, just staring at it. Like somehow I'd left the back door unlocked and now someone was sitting in my living room asking if I could make them coffee. It felt like the kind of thing that happens to other people, the kind of thing you read about in local Facebook groups. Someone gets a surprise tax bill or a tree gets cut down by accident. Not this, not my road, not my land, not the place where my kids still roast marshmallows on weekend nights and I go to sit by the lake when I can't sleep. But the thing is, these people weren't asking, they were planning. And I didn't know it yet, but the real fight hadn't even started. The first time they actually did something, I mean physically touched the property, I wasn't even home. I came back from a quick trip into town, just grabbing groceries and a new sump pump connector, and found the gate wide open, chain and all, just dangling there like someone had waltzed in, made themselves comfortable, and forgot to close the door behind them. For a second, I thought maybe it was my cousin Hank. He's the only one with the spare key, but no missed calls, no messages, nothing. Then I saw the new sign. It was bolted into the post right next to mine. Not hung, not taped, bolted. Big, reflective, regulation-size sign that read, Temporary Public Access, Community Pathway Initiative, Use respectfully. And right underneath it, in smaller font, authorized by Lake Point Reserve HOA in partnership with Whitlow County Recreation Committee. I just stood there, holding a sack of potatoes and a gallon of windshield washer fluid, trying to process what I was looking at. It wasn't just the sign. There were fresh tire tracks across the gravel, ones that didn't match mine. A couple sets, maybe more. Someone had driven in and out multiple times. My property, my road. And not only had they opened the gate, they had the balls to install an official-looking sign like they were doing me a favor. My wife came out when she heard the truck and saw me just standing there. She didn't say anything at first, just followed my eyes to the post, then walked up and gave the sign a once-over. "Did you approve this?" she asked, but her voice already had that edge. She knew I didn't. "Nope." She stared at it for a moment, then turned around and walked back into the house. That's how mad she was. Didn't yell, didn't curse, just turned around and went inside before she said something she couldn't take back. I didn't follow her. I stood there for a while, then walked over to the post. Sure enough, it was freshly drilled, clean edges around the bolts, probably done that morning. These weren't kids pulling a prank. This was intentional, coordinated. I called the HOA number listed at the bottom of the sign, straight to voicemail. Professional-sounding woman's voice. "You've reached the Lake Point Reserve HOA office. Office hours are Monday through Friday." You know the type? So I drove over there. Yep, straight to their little headquarters, which looks like it used to be a church before someone slapped on beige siding and turned the sanctuary into a conference room. Walked in, asked for whoever was in charge, and that's when I met Elaine Purcell for the first time. White hair, stiff blazer, nails done like she was heading to a fundraiser. She had that look, like she'd been waiting for me to show up so she could pretend to be surprised. "Oh, Mr. Merritt, I presume," she said with that politician smile, tight, friendly, and completely fake. "I was just drafting a follow-up email for you. I assume you saw the new signage?" I told her I did. I also told her she had no right to enter private property, remove a lock, or install anything without permission. Her smile didn't change. "I think there's a misunderstanding," she said. "There's a community improvement plan in place, supported by the county's recreation committee. This initiative has been in development for years. Your property, while technically private, has historically served as a functional public access point. It's time we formalized that arrangement for everyone's benefit." I swear I blinked twice just to make sure I was still awake. I asked her again, real calm. "Did you or anyone from your board step onto my property and install a sign without my consent?" Her response: "The community has spoken, Mr. Merritt. We're simply listening." That's when I realized something important. Elaine didn't think she needed my permission. She'd already decided I was an obstacle, not a landowner, not a person with a legal boundary, just a logistical inconvenience. She wasn't trying to reach an agreement. She was trying to make sure I didn't matter. I didn't yell, didn't threaten. I just left. When I got home, I didn't even take my boots off. I grabbed my socket wrench, walked back down to the post, and removed the bolts one by one. Pulled that sign off like peeling a bandage. It clanged when it hit the ground, and for a second I thought maybe I'd feel better. But I didn't. I knew that was just the beginning. And I was right. Things didn't get loud right away. That's the part that gets to you. It's not some big dramatic explosion. It's slow, subtle. You start to notice little changes, things slightly off, like someone rearranging your life 1 inch at a time. At first, it was just more cars. Not a flood, but enough to notice. A couple sedans, a van with paddleboards strapped to the roof, a guy on a motorcycle who stopped long enough in my yard to take a selfie with the lake in the background like he was in a damn travel brochure. I walked out and asked him what he was doing. He just smiled and said, "Oh, I saw this place on the Lake Point HOA website. They listed it as a public scenic overlook." I didn't even have the words for that one. I just told him it wasn't public and asked him to leave. He left, sure, but not before flipping his phone around to check the GPS, probably dropping a pin to come back later. I checked the HOA's website that night. Sure enough, there it was. A whole section about community lake access, complete with pictures I definitely hadn't taken, and a little blurb about enjoying nature together. There was even a photo of my dock. My actual dock. You could see the back of my kid's canoe in the frame. They'd just stolen it off Google Maps or something, slapped a watermark on it like they owned the view. That same week, I got my first friendly compliance notice in the mail. Not a fine, just a little nudge. It said my gate structure may be in violation of regional accessibility codes and encouraged me to reach out for an alignment plan. Whatever the hell that meant. I called the number on the letter, same HOA voicemail, same sweet-sounding nothing. So I emailed, got a bounce back saying their inbox was full. Next thing I know, someone starts trimming branches on the east side of the road, the side with my old pine windbreak. Just the bottom ones, enough to give taller vehicles better clearance. No note, no call, nothing. I only noticed because I saw fresh sawdust near the fence and a couple stumps where branches used to hang down low. Those trees were planted by my dad. He used to joke they were his second line of defense after the gate. Now they were being pruned like city-owned property. So I started walking the road every day, just to see what else might be happening without me knowing. That's when I found the drone. It was parked in a bush next to the lower slope, battery drained, camera still attached. Not mine. I don't even own one, but it had a sticker on it. LPR-DEV, shorthand for Lake Point Reserve Development, I'm guessing. I don't know if it crashed or someone just forgot to pick it up, but that thing had clearly been filming. I popped the SD card out and checked it on my laptop. They'd flown it over my dock, over my house, over the kids' tire swing in the backyard. I showed the footage to my wife and she went dead silent, not angry, not crying, just pale and still, like someone had taken a picture of her naked without asking. She clicked through every second, jaw locked tight. We had a long talk that night. She wanted to move. I told her that's exactly what they were hoping for. She didn't argue. She just asked me what the plan was, and I told her the truth. I didn't have one. Not yet. A few days later, the police showed up. It was about 6 p.m. I was helping my daughter with her science project when I saw the lights from the kitchen window. 2 squad cars parked by the gate. Not with sirens or anything, just sitting there with their doors open, lights spinning slow like they were waiting for something. I stepped outside, wiping glue off my hands, and walked up the drive. One of the officers was a younger guy, nervous, almost apologetic. The other one, a woman maybe in her 40s, had that look like she'd seen too many versions of this play out. Calm, professional, no smiles. "Mr. Merritt?" she asked. "Yeah." "We received a call about a disturbance at this location. Report said you were harassing pedestrians on the access path." I actually laughed. Not loud, just that dry, disbelieving kind of sound that comes out when reality bends a little too far to feel real. "Access path?" I asked. She glanced down at her notepad. "The road in question is listed under a pending classification as public easement. Our system shows an ongoing dispute." I nodded slowly. "You mean my driveway?" She didn't blink. "That's one interpretation." I explained everything. How the road was built by my family, how the land was private, how the drone had filmed my kids, how the HOA kept acting like they owned the place. I didn't yell, I didn't curse, I just laid it out. The younger cop, the nervous one, kept glancing toward the trees like he didn't want to be there. The woman listened, took notes. Then she said, "Until the property status is clarified through legal channels, we're not going to take enforcement action. But I would advise against confronting anyone directly. Let us handle it." "Will you?" I asked. She looked at me, then back at her pad. "We'll file a report." They left after that. No arrests, no citations. Just left me standing there like some crazy hermit who thinks the government's coming for his bird feeders. It wasn't even dark yet, and I already felt like I'd aged 5 years. That night, someone parked a minivan by the lake and left trash all over the shoreline. Empty soda bottles, fast food wrappers, plastic bags, the kind of stuff you don't notice until it's blowing across your yard. And on the path up to the dock, right where the old pine roots twist through the gravel, someone had scratched 3 words into the dirt with a stick. "Share or leave." I didn't sleep much after that. Not because I was scared, not yet. It was something worse than fear. It was the beginning of doubt. Before things got any worse, I figured I had to at least try doing things the right way. You know, the grown-up, sensible, non-confrontational way. The paperwork way. Call the right people, file the right forms, play it by the book. I started with the county office. Lanskady just drove down there with a folder under my arm and a pit in my stomach. The guy at the front desk looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, but he pointed me to a back room where they keep the zoning records. Long beige cabinets, flickering lights, no windows. The kind of place where time goes to nap. I gave the clerk my parcel number and asked if they had any record of a public easement running through my land. He gave me this tight smile and said, "That's above my pay grade," then went back to typing like I hadn't said a thing. I pressed a little harder and eventually got to talk to someone with an actual nameplate on their desk. Mark something, planning department. Mid-50s, heavy mustache, shirt too tight at the collar. The kind of guy who probably uses phrases like "let's circle back" even when talking to his dog. He listened to my story, nodded a lot, tapped his pen, and finally said, "We've received multiple requests from the Lake Point Reserve HOA to designate that route as a shared use corridor. They've submitted historical use documentation and community support signatures." I asked if my name was on any of those documents. "No," he said, "but it doesn't have to be. Technically, they're arguing that your land has served as de facto public access for more than 10 years. If that's the case, they can petition for limited easement designation. There's precedent." "Precedent?" I asked. "Precedent for walking onto someone's property, ripping out a lock, and putting up a sign?" He shrugged. "That part's murky." I thanked him, politely somehow, and left with a new stack of forms and an even bigger headache. Over the next couple weeks, I sent letters. Not emails, not texts, real, physical letters. One to the HOA board, one to the county zoning committee, and one to the sheriff's department. Each one laying out my position, my rights, and my history with the land. I included the original plat map from when my dad registered the property back in the 70s, a copy of the deed, and photos of the old road from before any of their houses were even built. I didn't hear back for 10 days. Then I got a reply, from the HOA, of course. 4 pages of carefully worded nonsense full of phrases like collective benefit, environmental stewardship, and my personal favorite, resistance to community cohesion. They made it sound like I was standing in the way of world peace because I didn't want strangers using my yard as a shortcut to their paddleboards. The kicker? The letter ended by inviting me to attend an upcoming HOA meeting to discuss potential resolutions in a spirit of mutual respect. I didn't want to go. My wife said I probably shouldn't go, but I went anyway, because part of me still believed, or wanted to believe, that maybe this was just a case of crossed wires, a misunderstanding. That maybe, just maybe, if I stood in front of them and explained things calmly, they'd see me as a person and not just a parcel of land on a map. The meeting was held in their clubhouse, fancy little building with a fake stone fireplace and Keurig machines lined up like they were preparing for battle. Everything smelled like cinnamon and money. Elaine was there, of course, wearing the same blazer I'd seen her in at the office, like it was part of her uniform. She welcomed me with that same too-wide smile and gestured toward a plastic chair near the back, right between the snack table and the trash can. Subtle. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, held my copy of the deed in one hand and the old photos in the other, and laid it all out. Told them about the road's history, about my dad, about the way this whole thing had turned our home life upside down. I even told them, and this was true, that I didn't hate the idea of sharing the lake. I just wanted control over how and when. I offered to discuss a limited access plan, maybe scheduled hours, maybe permits, something fair. When I finished, Elaine gave a polite clap. Then she smiled at the rest of the room and said, "We appreciate Mr. Merritt's perspective. However, as community leaders, we must sometimes make difficult choices in the interest of the greater good." And just like that, the discussion moved on, to picnic planning and repainting mailboxes and a new sign for the tennis courts. Like I hadn't said a word. One guy, middle-aged, sunburned, in cargo shorts and flip-flops, caught me on the way out. Said he understood where I was coming from. Told me he grew up on a farm and hated the way people treat land like it's just open space. I thanked him. Then he said, "But you know, it'd really help property values if we had real access to the lake." I left before I said something I'd regret. Back home, I filed an official complaint with the county. Took me 3 hours to fill out the forms. I uploaded everything, pictures, documents, even screenshots of the HOA's website where they advertised open lake access. It felt good, honestly, like I was doing something real, like maybe, finally, someone would have to take me seriously. A week later, I got a response. It was 1 paragraph long. "Your complaint has been received and is under review. You will be notified if further action is required." That was it. No follow-up, no contact, just more silence. And in the meantime, the cars kept coming. More signs started popping up. Small ones this time, laminated sheets stapled to trees, little arrows pointing toward the lake with cheerful slogans like "This way to nature" and "Explore our hidden gem." Except it wasn't their gem. It was mine. And I was starting to realize these people weren't going to stop. Not because they were evil, not because they hated me, but because in their minds, this land wasn't personal. It was potential. And I was just the guy in the way. I didn't find it looking for a fight. I found it digging through an old Rubbermaid tub labeled "Dad, Property Stuff." It had been sitting in the garage for years, back behind the busted pressure washer and a bag of birdseed that turned to cement. I hadn't opened that thing since we moved in after the funeral. I was looking for a survey pin map I swore I'd seen as a kid, hoping it'd help shore up my side of the boundary claim. Instead, I found a manila folder that just said, WC Emergency Access, 1983. It was thick, too thick for just a survey. I opened it up on the tailgate of my truck and flipped through the pages with a slow sinking feeling. Inside was a signed agreement, official seal and everything, between my dad and Whitlow County. Not the HOA, the county, dated 40 years ago. And it spelled out, in very clear language, that the road was private property, not a public easement, not a shared path, and would remain private except in cases of emergency like fire, flood, or evacuation. In exchange, my dad agreed to keep the gravel road maintained to emergency standards, which he did every year, religiously. But the real kicker? Attached to the agreement was a hand-sketched map with our property line marked out in red ink, labeled Merit Private Easement, emergency use only, not for general public access. And on the back of that page, a memo. A memo from the county legal department signed by the then director warning that future encroachments by neighboring developments must recognize this road as wholly private and outside of HOA jurisdiction. It even said, this document must be retained for future disputes. I just sat there staring at it, mouth dry, heart beating like I'd swallowed a hive. This wasn't just good news. This was nuclear. They knew. There was no way Elaine didn't know. Someone in that HOA, maybe even multiple people, had seen this agreement at some point. It was in the county's own files, or had been, before they got misplaced. Hell, for all I knew, the only reason they were pushing so hard now was because they assumed I didn't have a copy. But I did. And more than that, there was another detail buried in the folder, one I almost missed. A letter from 2004, handwritten, from my dad to a guy named Russ Danford, a former county planner who apparently helped draft the original agreement. The letter thanked him for helping protect the family land from that HOA mess, said he hoped they never try that again. Turns out they already had. Back in 2004, the HOA had tried to rezone the access path as part of a community trail project. It never went anywhere because Russ, who was still in the planning office back then, killed it in committee before it reached a vote. So this wasn't their first attempt. It was just the first one I'd seen, which meant everything they were doing now, the signs, the drone, the fake community access claims, wasn't just shady. It was deliberate. They were banking on me not knowing the history, on me being too passive, too polite, too overwhelmed to push back. They thought I was just some guy in a flannel shirt who fixed things in his garage and drank too much coffee and eventually would give up and move on. And honestly, they weren't far off. I had been tired, worn down. I'd started second-guessing everything. Was I being selfish? Was I the bad neighbor? Was I fighting some dumb battle just because I didn't like change? But that folder shut those doubts up real fast. It reminded me that this wasn't about being stubborn. It was about being right. About keeping a promise my dad made before I even knew how to read a deed. I stayed up that night scanning every single page, organized them, labeled them, even made a backup on 2 different thumb drives and uploaded copies to cloud storage just in case. I was done playing defense. Now I had something to fight with, and I knew exactly where I was going to aim it. I didn't do anything drastic right away. No big speeches, no threats, no storming the HOA meeting with a manila folder in hand. I didn't even tell Elaine what I'd found. What I did do was sit down at the kitchen table and make a list. Just me, a yellow legal pad, and a strong cup of black coffee. Because if I was going to beat these people, and I mean really beat them, I had to stop reacting and start getting ahead. First thing I did was find a lawyer, not a big firm, not some billboard guy with a fake tan and a slogan like "We fight for you." I needed someone who understood land use law, zoning, property rights, someone who didn't just talk like they read a book about it once. Turns out that someone was a woman named Julia Patel, runs a small practice 2 towns over, used to work in the county recorder's office, and according to a neighbor I trust, eats HOA board members for breakfast. I liked her immediately. I brought her the folder. She flipped through it slowly, nodding more with every page, and then looked up and said, "You've been incredibly patient, Mr. Merritt. If it were me, I'd already have sent half their board a cease and desist." Music to my ears? She explained exactly what we had, not just a strong case, but an ironclad paper trail. The emergency easement agreement, the original memo, the zoning overlays, the 2004 letter. It was all gold. She said most people in my position don't have anything. No paperwork, no photos, no history. I had everything. And the kicker? The HOA had already crossed legal lines multiple times. Trespassing, unauthorized signage, misrepresentation of public access. The trick, she said, wasn't just to prove they were wrong. It was to prove they knew they were wrong, and did it anyway. So while she worked on the legal strategy, I started working on the optics. I didn't want this to turn into some screaming match. That's what they wanted, to paint me as the angry recluse yelling at kids to get off his lawn. So instead, I leaned into exactly who I was, the guy who fixes watches, mows his own lawn, and just wants to protect his family and his land. I wrote a letter, not a legal one, just a plain-spoken letter, and I sent it to a handful of neighbors I still trusted, folks who hadn't taken sides or stopped waving when they drove by. I explained the history, the agreement from 1983, the memo, the fact that the HOA had been pushing this for years and never once told the full story. I didn't ask them to pick a side, I just asked them to read what I sent and make up their own minds. And here's the thing, people notice when you don't come out swinging, when you just lay out the facts and let the truth settle on its own. A few of them emailed me back. One guy called, a father of 3 who said he'd been getting pressured to support the community trail idea but didn't know the road was actually private. Said if the roles were reversed, he'd be furious too. Then I reached out to a local journalist I knew from way back. Sarah Hong used to cover county council meetings, now does freelance features and human interest stuff. I told her the whole story, sent her the documents, the drone footage, even the screenshots of the HOA's fake lake access page. She didn't promise anything, but I could tell I had her attention. While she started working on her piece, Julia filed 2 formal notices, one to the HOA board, demanding immediate cessation of all encroachments, and one to the county planning office requesting that they suspend the access petition due to prior legal agreements and misrepresentation. We also filed for a temporary injunction, which, if granted, would legally block the HOA from doing anything more until a hearing was held. And because that wasn't enough to make me feel like I had at least some control again, I put up new signs at the entrance to the road. Not angry ones, not hand-painted threats or anything that'd end up on Nextdoor as unhinged behavior. Just a clear, professional-looking plaque. Private property, no public access, protected by emergency easement agreement, Whitlow County. 1983, and right under that, a QR code that linked to a scanned copy of the document. I figured if they wanted to make this public, I'd oblige them. On my terms. Because this wasn't about just keeping cars off a gravel path anymore. It was about keeping history from being rewritten by people who hadn't earned the right to touch it. Once the injunction went through, and it did, thank God, I felt like I could finally breathe for the first time in months. The county put a temporary freeze on all activity related to the easement proposal. No more signs, no more trail cleanups, no more mystery landscaping crews pretending they were doing community service. I knew it wouldn't last forever, but it bought me time, and I used every second of it. Julia kept hammering them with paper. She sent formal cease and desist letters to every board member individually, not just the HOA office. She also filed a complaint with the County Ethics Board, citing willful omission of legal precedent during a land classification petition. Which is the calm lawyer way of saying, you lied and now it's in writing. But I didn't just sit around waiting for things to shake out in court. I made noise. Remember Sarah, the journalist I reached out to? She came through harder than I expected. She called me one afternoon, asking if I'd be willing to do an interview, on camera. Local public access station, but still, TV is TV. I was hesitant. I'm not a camera guy, I don't like talking in sound bites or being edited down to 5-second quotes. But she said, people need to see you. Not just your documents, you. So I did it. We filmed most of it standing under the old oak tree where my dad's buried. I showed her the dock, the road, the roots of those pines that had been cut back. We walked the gravel path and I pointed to the edges where people had trampled down the moss, broke low branches, left cigarette butts. Not a mess, just enough little wounds to feel like the land was bleeding. Then I handed her the folder. The same manila one I found in the garage with the agreement, the maps, the memo. She filmed it. Every page, every signature, every underlined sentence. The segment aired later that week. I figured a few hundred people might catch it. Maybe a few dozen would care. But it caught fire, not viral, like big city viral, but enough that my phone lit up nonstop. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years sent texts. One guy who'd ghosted me after the HOA meeting emailed me to apologize. Said he hadn't known the history, hadn't seen the documents, thought I was just being difficult. He even offered to speak at the next board meeting if I needed support. But the biggest shift? The cars stopped, almost overnight. No more out-of-town plates, no more teenagers wandering down to the lake with Bluetooth speakers. Even the laminated trail signs disappeared, taken down quietly like they'd never been there. I didn't touch them. I didn't need to. They knew the tide had turned. A week later, I got an email from Elaine. First time she'd contacted me directly since all this began. No greeting, no apology, just a short, clipped message saying the HOA would be suspending further initiatives related to lake access pending legal review. I printed it out and taped it to the fridge next to my daughter's drawing of a frog in a canoe. But I wasn't done yet. I attended the next HOA open meeting. They didn't want me there. I wasn't technically a member since my land sits just outside the district. But they couldn't legally block me from attending. Elaine looked smaller, still well-dressed, still in control, but you could feel the tension coming off her in waves. She barely acknowledged me. Instead, she focused the meeting on community gardening and flagpole lighting, so I waited, and when they opened the floor for community comments, I stood up, slowly, and walked to the front. I didn't yell, I didn't gloat, I just held up the same folder I'd handed Sarah and said, "This land has been in my family for almost 50 years. It was never public. It was never yours, and everything you've done to pretend otherwise, from signs to surveillance, has consequences. I'm not here to start a war. I'm here to make sure no one else has to go through this again." A few people clapped, not many, but the silence that followed was the good kind, the heavy kind. I left before the meeting ended. Didn't need to see Elaine squirm. That wasn't the point. The point was making sure they understood. This wasn't about a road. It was about being heard. And now, finally, they were listening. They tried to keep it quiet, of course. After the TV segment aired, after the injunction landed, after my lawyer started getting actual responses instead of silence, the HOA changed their tune. No more big public claims, no more emails to the neighborhood about trail expansion or lakefront improvement. They even pulled the whole access section off their website like it had never been there to begin with. But by then, it was too late. The story had legs. Sarah's piece got picked up by a regional outlet, nothing huge, just one of those local news syndicates that covers everything from county fairs to zoning disputes. But that syndicate fed into 3 others, and suddenly my gravel road and I were the subject of a full-on human interest spiral. Family defends private land from HOA overreach. Historic agreement surfaces in lake access dispute. Who really owns Devil's Elbow? That last one got under Elaine's skin the most, I think. She wrote a response, a formal statement from the HOA, trying to spin the whole thing as a misunderstanding, claimed they'd been operating in good faith based on incomplete county records, and had never intended to infringe on private rights. Which would have been real compelling if not for the footage of their board meeting where Elaine literally said, "If we push hard enough, he'll cave." Yep, Sarah had gotten her hands on that too. Someone had leaked a recording. Might have been one of the board members, might have been someone in the room who just didn't like the smell of what was happening. Either way, it aired. Her follow-up story played the clip right after a shot of my dad's handwritten note thanking the county planner for keeping the HOA off our backs. It hit hard. Folks started asking questions, not just neighbors, voters. The county planning office got flooded with emails, calls, even a petition to audit all pending access designations across Whitlow. One board member from Lake Point Reserve resigned quietly, citing personal health matters. Another tried to spin it as a breakdown in communication between landowners and local leadership, which made my lawyer snort when she read it. But the real breaking point came at a county council meeting. They opened the floor to public comment on the issue, and I didn't even have to speak. 3 other homeowners stood up and tore into the HOA's actions, not just what they'd done to me, but a pattern of overreach, shady land proposals, pushing elderly residents into selling under pressure. One woman had receipts, literal screenshots of an email thread where Elaine's office tried to get her to reconsider the value of her inherited land for the good of the community. People had had enough. The council moved quickly after that. They issued a formal review of the Lake Point Reserve HOA's recent land petitions, all of them, and they made it clear that any use of private property without documented signed consent would be grounds for legal action. Period. Then came the cherry on top. Sarah aired one final segment, short but perfect. She walked the same road down toward my dock, camera following behind her, the same gravel road they'd tried to rename, rezone, repurpose. She ended the piece standing beside the oak tree at the top of the slope. "I spoke with Mr. Merritt off camera," she said, "and he told me something that stuck with me. He said, 'This road doesn't go to the lake, it goes home, always has.' I'm not a sentimental guy, but I'll admit, that one got me. After that, I didn't have to explain anything to anyone. The truth was out. It was loud, and for once, I wasn't the one doing the talking. Life's quieter now. Not like it used to be. Not exactly. I mean, the land's still the same. The trees still drop pine cones in the same spots. The lake still does that thing at sundown where it glows just long enough to make you forget how bad traffic was on the way home. But something shifted. It's not just the absence of strangers or tire tracks, it's the feeling of not looking over your shoulder. The signs I put up are still there, same plaque, same QR code, but the gate stays closed now, locked too, and no one's tested it since the council ruling. Elaine stepped down from the HOA board, said it was for personal reasons. I didn't throw a party or anything. I just poured a drink, sat on the dock, and listened to the frogs. Julia still checks in from time to time, says the paperwork's all ironed out now. We updated the deed to include scanned copies of the 1983 agreement just to make it official. Everything locked down, legally bulletproof. My daughter calls it Dad's Fortress, but I think she means it affectionately. That little trail the HOA used to call a community pathway. It's just gravel again. Grass is starting to creep in from the sides. I let it. Feels right. Not everything has to be sharp-edged and official. Funny thing is, I still see a few neighbors from Lake Point walking by the fence sometimes. Not on the road, just near it. On their own side. Some wave. I wave back. We don't talk much, but there's no tension in it anymore. Just space, boundaries, the good kind. Sarah sent me a signed copy of the magazine her story got reprinted in. She stuck a post-it on the front. Still think you're not a camera guy, it said. It's in the drawer under my tools. My wife said the whole thing aged me a few years, but she also says I sleep deeper now. I think she's right. You fight long enough, you forget what it feels like to just rest, to sit on your porch with a cup of coffee and know the ground under your feet actually belongs to you. And if someone ever comes poking around again, trying to redraw lines or rename roads, they're going to find something waiting for them. Not anger, not revenge, just roots. Old deep roots that don't budge easy. Same as always.